Some breaking news in the investigation into the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie.
In this episode, though, I'm getting into a theory that I've thought about for a while, but I haven't really dived into, which is sort of this elder abuse theory. And with Nancy's case, I know a lot of people think it's just gotten so much attention because of Savannah Guthrie, her daughter, who's obviously famous, which is obviously partly true. But I also think it's gotten a lot of attention because a lot of us with parents who are getting older, this is really like our worst nightmare. And you think about all the people who come in and out of their homes, whether it be like healthcare workers or helpers, and it's like a revolving door in some ways, especially as parents get older. And could that have something to do with this case? Could this be a case of elder abuse? Could this be someone who was inside Nancy's home?
What makes this disappearance particularly significant from an investigative standpoint is the extraordinary digital footprint that exists from that night. Every phone in Nancy's Catalina Foothills neighborhood was communicating with cell towers throughout the evening, creating a comprehensive electronic record of activity and presence. But within that vast digital landscape, there are also conspicuous absences, deliberate gaps, and technological anomalies that have become central to understanding what happened. On February 4th, just 4 days into this investigation, federal agents arrived at a Tucson residence carrying what forensic technology experts identified as a Cellebrite Universal Forensic Extraction device. Photographs of this visit were obtained by media outlets, and the significance of this particular piece of equipment cannot be overstated. This is the same technology that played a crucial role in identifying Brian Kohberger in the Idaho College student murders, a case that demonstrated how modern digital forensics can track movements, communications, and intentions, even when a suspect believes they have covered their tracks. The phone that federal investigators extracted data from that morning belonged to the last person known to have seen Nancy Guthrie alive. For 74 days now, the contents of that extraction have remained in a federal evidence file without public disclosure. That silence, that prolonged period without official statement about what was found, is itself one of the most significant aspects of this entire investigation. Before we go further into what happened that night and what investigators may have discovered, I want to ask you to do something important. If you are finding value in this detailed analysis and want to stay updated as new information emerges in Nancy Guthrie's case, please take a moment right now to subscribe to True Crime Case Study and hit the like button on this video. This case is developing, and your subscription ensures you will not miss critical updates as they happen. We are committed to bringing you factual, thoroughly researched coverage of cases that matter, and your support allows us to continue this work. Now let us establish exactly what we know happened on the night Nancy Guthrie disappeared, using the timeline that has been confirmed through multiple sources and official statements. January 31st, 2025, was a Saturday evening. Nancy Guthrie had plans to visit her daughter Annie and Annie's husband Tommaso at their Tucson home. According to family members and investigative reports, Nancy used a rideshare service to travel to their residence, arriving at 5:32 in the evening. This detail is important because it establishes that Nancy was not driving herself at night, a practice that family members have explained was consistent with her preferences. Despite being an independent woman who resisted any suggestion of assisted living or reduced autonomy, Nancy had made the decision not to drive after dark. Her daughter Annie later explained in media interviews that Nancy was very much like Savannah Guthrie in terms of fierce independence. Nancy had become both mother and father to her daughters after her husband died when they were teenagers, and that experience of handling everything alone had shaped her into someone who valued and protected her ability to manage her own life. She maintained her own home, kept her own schedule, and made her own decisions about how she wanted to live. The evening at Annie and Tommaso's home was, by all accounts, a typical social visit. Nancy enjoyed playing games with her daughter and son-in-law. In a television appearance Nancy had made with Savannah prior to her disappearance, she was shown having a margarita, with Savannah teasingly warning her mother not to drink the whole thing because of her small stature. These details paint a picture of an active social woman who enjoyed her routines and her family time. At 9:48 that evening, Tommaso drove Nancy home. The drive from their residence to Nancy's home in the Catalina Foothills took approximately 10 minutes. This was not an unusual arrangement. Nancy needed a ride home, and her son-in-law provided one, just as he presumably had done many times before. They arrived at Nancy's home, and according to the established timeline, the garage door closed at 9:50 in the evening. Tommaso's vehicle then left the property. That moment, 9:50 p.m. on January 31st, represents the last confirmed sighting of Nancy Guthrie by someone who has publicly accounted for their movements that night. What happened during the hours that followed has become the central mystery of this case, but before we examine that critical window of time, we need to understand something fundamental about modern criminal investigations. Every smartphone in America is essentially a tracking device that creates a continuous record of location and activity. These phones communicate with cell towers constantly, sending out signals that get logged with timestamps and location data. This happens whether the phone's owner is actively using the device or not. As long as a phone is powered on and within range of a tower, it is creating a digital trail. This technology has revolutionized criminal investigation over the past decade. In the Brian Kohberger case, which resulted in his arrest for the murders of 4 University of Idaho students, cell tower data played an absolutely critical role. Investigators determined that Kohberger's phone had been turned off during the time the murders occurred, creating what digital forensics experts call a deliberate blackout. However, the data from before and after that blackout, combined with cell tower information from the area around the crime scene, helped establish his presence and movements. That case demonstrated that even when someone tries to avoid leaving a digital trail, the absence of that trail can itself become incriminating evidence. In Nancy Guthrie's case, every phone in her neighborhood was creating this kind of digital record throughout the evening of January 31st. The Uber driver who brought Nancy to her daughter's home had a phone. Annie had a phone. Tommaso had a phone. Nancy herself had an iPhone, which was connected to her pacemaker, a detail that would later become critically important. All of these devices were communicating with cell towers, creating overlapping records of presence and movement. Here is what makes the timeline of that night so significant from a digital forensics perspective. Between 9:50 p.m., when Tommaso's car left Nancy's property, and the early morning hours of February 1st, a series of technological events occurred that investigators have been working to understand and explain. Sometime around 1:47 in the morning, Nancy's doorbell camera stopped recording. This was not the only surveillance technology in the area that experienced problems during this time frame. According to reports from neighbors and investigative sources, multiple surveillance cameras in the vicinity showed missing footage corresponding to roughly the same period. This pattern is consistent with what experts describe as wireless interference, a phenomenon that can occur naturally due to equipment malfunction or weather conditions, but which can also be deliberately induced using readily available technology. At 2:12 a.m., and a camera sensor at or near Nancy's property detected movement. 18 minutes later, at 2:28 in the morning, Nancy's pacemaker disconnected from her iPhone. The signal was gone. This sequence of events, the camera blackout, the movement detection, and the pacemaker disconnection, represents the hard factual timeline that investigators have been working with. These are not matters of interpretation or witness testimony. These are time-stamped electronic records that either exist or do not exist in server logs and device memories. When a pacemaker loses connection with a paired smartphone, several possibilities exist. The phone could have been moved beyond the range of the Bluetooth connection that links the devices. The phone itself could have been powered off or destroyed. The pacemaker could have ceased functioning due to the death of the patient. Or there could have been deliberate interference with the wireless signals that allow these devices to communicate. Each of these possibilities carries different implications for what happened to Nancy Guthrie during those early morning hours, and investigators have had access to much more detailed data than has been made public. They know, for instance, whether Nancy's iPhone continued to ping cell towers after the pacemaker lost connection, which would indicate the phone was moved away from her rather than destroyed or powered down with her. They know whether there were any attempted communications to or from that phone during the critical hours. They know what the pacemaker's own internal logs recorded up until the moment the connection was lost. All of this information has been in the possession of law enforcement and federal investigators for more than 2 months now. The FBI became involved in this case very early, which itself indicates the seriousness with which authorities regarded Nancy's disappearance from the beginning. Federal jurisdiction in a missing person case typically requires either evidence of interstate activity or circumstances suggesting a federal crime. The speed with which the FBI entered this investigation suggests that something in those initial hours prompted a determination that federal resources were warranted, and that brings us back to February 4th, day 4 of the investigation, and the photographs that showed federal agents arriving at a Tucson home with the Celebrite device. The Celebrite Universal Forensic Extraction Device represents the cutting edge of digital forensic technology. It is used by law enforcement agencies in more than 150 countries, and its capabilities are extraordinary. When this device is connected to a smartphone, it can extract a complete forensic image of everything that phone contains or has ever contained. This includes the obvious things like current text messages and call logs, but it goes far beyond that. Celebrite extraction recovers deleted text messages, sometimes going back months or even years depending on how the phone's memory has been overwritten. It pulls complete GPS location history, showing everywhere that phone has traveled, with timestamps accurate to the second. It extracts data from encrypted messaging applications like WhatsApp, Signal, and iMessage, bypassing the encryption that is supposed to protect that content. It recovers browsing history, app usage data, photographs and videos including those that have been deleted, and even information about other devices that have connected to the phone via Bluetooth or Wi-Fi. In the context of a criminal investigation, this kind of extraction can provide a minute-by-minute reconstruction of a person's movements, communications, and activities. If someone deleted a message at 3 in the morning, the extraction will show not only what that message said, but exactly when it was deleted.
Slow down a little bit because I think the reason she wasn't driving at night is probably because she doesn't drive in the dark. And she's a very independent woman. Much like Savannah, our father died when I was the same age Savannah was when her dad died. And our mom became the mom and the dad. That makes you a very independent person. You all of a sudden have to do everything that you did as a couple, as well as parent children, which is obviously very hard, especially teenagers. And so she's an independent woman that wants to remain independent. And that's how I want to be. I don't want to go into a home, and my mother said that to her dying day. I do not want to go into any kind of assisted living or anything at all. And she passed away in her sleep, which was a blessing. Very hard for all of us. But so I think Nancy was independent. Obviously, she was very with it. She didn't want to drive at night because a lot of people don't like driving at night, and they don't want to pull into their driveway home alone, come into an empty, dark house. But they're fine during the day. So it could have just been something like that.
What were you going to say, Jim?
No, I think she also had hearing issues and
Yes.
pretty powerful hearing aids which she probably removed at night, which makes her even more vulnerable.
Yeah. There was a few people I've talked to out here who are being kind of judgmental, like, why would they let her Uber? Like, who lets their 84-year-old mom Uber? It didn't seem that weird to me. And also, like you were saying, Maureen, you know, if your parent wants to be independent and, you know, has been your parent for, I mean, you can only do so much. I mean, you
Right.
kind of have to let them do their thing at some point and just hope that everything's going to be okay.
And in the TV show she did with Savannah, she had a margarita. And Savannah even said, "Don't drink the whole thing, Mom," or whatever, because she was tiny. So maybe she likes going over to Annie's house and playing games and having a margarita. And that way she couldn't drive home either.
What would the motivation be, Jim, for someone who worked in the house to come back this way?
Well, the thing is, it doesn't create the motivation. The motivation was there, and what it did was it gave them the information that they now knew this was an opportunity to take advantage of. So we've discussed this before, there are a number of different potential motivations.
If someone drove to a specific location and then later claimed they had never been there, the GPS data will reveal the truth. If someone used their phone to search for information about how to disable security cameras or interfere with wireless signals, that search history will be recovered even if they cleared their browser. This was the technology that federal agents brought to extract data from the phone belonging to the last person known to have seen Nancy Guthrie alive. The fact that this extraction happened on day 4 is significant for multiple reasons. First, it indicates that investigators very quickly identified this phone as a priority for forensic examination. In a missing person investigation, there are always multiple people whose movements and communications might be relevant. But the decision to deploy federal forensic resources on a specific device within 96 hours shows that investigators had focused their attention based on the initial evidence and timeline. Second, the early timing of this extraction means that whatever data was on that phone was secured before there was time for extensive deletion or alteration. Even though Celebrite can recover deleted material, the sooner an extraction happens after relevant events, the more complete the recovery tends to be. Third, and perhaps most significantly, the fact that this extraction occurred in the first week of February means that investigators have had access to this data for the entire duration of the investigation that has followed. Every decision made, every statement released or withheld, every direction the investigation has taken for more than 2 months has been informed by what was found on that phone. So what exactly would investigators have been looking for when they performed this extraction? Based on the timeline and circumstances of Nancy's disappearance, several categories of information would have been priorities. The first and most obvious would be location data. The phone that was extracted belonged to someone who drove Nancy home at 9:48 p.m. and whose vehicle left her property at 9:50. But where did that phone go after 9:50? Did it travel directly back to another residence and remain there for the rest of the night? Or does the GPS data show movement during the hours that followed, particularly during the window between 1:47 a.m., when cameras went dark, and 2:28 when the pacemaker disconnected? If the GPS data shows the phone returning to a specific location and remaining stationary there throughout the critical hours, that would support an account of someone going home and staying home. If the data shows movement during those hours, particularly movement back toward Nancy's neighborhood, that would be extraordinarily significant evidence. The second category would be communications. Were there any text messages, calls, or app-based messages sent or received during the evening of January 31st or the early morning of February 1st? More importantly, were there any communications that were subsequently deleted? The pattern of when messages were sent, to whom, and whether they were later erased, can reveal consciousness of guilt or efforts to coordinate stories. The third category would be search history and app usage. Did the phone's user search for anything related to the case in the hours or days before Nancy's disappearance? Did they access any applications that might be relevant to understanding their activities or state of mind? The fourth category, which is particularly relevant given the camera blackouts reported in Nancy's neighborhood, would be any evidence of research or communication about surveillance technology, wireless interference, or methods of avoiding detection. If such searches or communications existed and were later deleted, their recovery through forensic extraction would represent powerful evidence of premeditation. All of this data was pulled from the phone on February 4th and has been sitting in a federal evidence file ever since. The question that hangs over this entire case is simple. What did that extraction reveal? In the Brian Kohberger investigation, digital forensics played such a central role that the timeline from the commission of the crime to his arrest can be measured in weeks. Cell tower data, surveillance footage, and digital records came together to build a case that led to charges. The technology used was similar, the methods were comparable, and the FBI was involved in both cases. Yet here we are, 74 days into the Nancy Guthrie investigation, with no arrest, no public disclosure of what the phone extraction revealed, and a family still searching for answers about what happened to their mother and grandmother. This silence is itself a form of information. There are several possible explanations for why investigators have not revealed what they found. One possibility is that the extraction revealed evidence that is being used to build a complex case, requiring additional corroboration before charges can be filed. In high-profile investigations, prosecutors often want to ensure that every element of their case is absolutely solid before moving forward, particularly if they believe they are dealing with a suspect who had some knowledge of investigative techniques and took steps to avoid detection. Another possibility is that the extraction was exculpatory, meaning it showed that the person whose phone was examined was not involved in Nancy's disappearance. However, if this were the case, it would be unusual for authorities not to say so, as clearing someone who was last known to be with a missing person would typically be announced to redirect public attention and investigative resources. A third possibility is that the extraction revealed something unexpected, information that opened new lines of inquiry or implicated individuals not initially suspected. This could explain why the investigation has continued without public updates, as investigators work to follow leads that emerged from the digital evidence. What we can say with certainty is that the FBI has access to a complete digital picture of what happened on the night Nancy Guthrie disappeared. They know where every phone in that neighborhood was located and when. They know what communications occurred. They know what searches were conducted and what applications were used. They have the technological evidence that modern forensics makes available, and they have had it for more than 10 weeks. Nancy's family has been living with this uncertainty for all of that time. Savannah Guthrie has continued her work at NBC News while privately dealing with her mother's disappearance. Annie has had to reconcile her last evening with her mother, what should have been an ordinary Saturday night of games and conversation, with the fact that hours later, Nancy was gone. The family has issued statements asking for privacy while expressing gratitude for public concern and law enforcement efforts. The case has also resonated deeply with people across the country who have aging parents and who understand the particular vulnerabilities that come with that stage of life. Nancy Guthrie was by all accounts a vibrant, independent woman who was managing her life on her own terms. She had made accommodations for safety, like not driving at night, but she had not surrendered her autonomy or her active engagement with family and the world around her. Yet something happened in those early morning hours of February 1st that interrupted her life and left behind only digital traces and unanswered questions. The doorbell camera that went dark, the movement sensor that detected activity at 2:12 a.m., the pacemaker that lost connection at 2:28. These electronic breadcrumbs represent the last confirmed evidence of events at Nancy's home that night. Somewhere in the data extracted from that phone on February 4th may lie the answers to what those breadcrumbs mean. Somewhere in the GPS coordinates, the message logs, the deleted files, and recovered data may be the information that explains what happened to Nancy Guthrie and where she is now. The technology exists to tell us. The extraction has been completed. The evidence is in federal hands. What remains is the process of investigation, analysis, and ultimately, we hope, justice. As we wait for further developments in this case, it is important to remember that behind all of the digital forensics and investigative procedures is a real person who is missing and a family that deserves answers. Nancy Guthrie is someone's mother, someone's grandmother, someone's friend. Her disappearance has created a hole in the lives of people who love her, and every day that passes without resolution is another day of anguish for them. If you have been following this case and want to ensure you receive updates as soon as new information becomes available, please subscribe to True Crime Case Study right now. We are committed to continuing coverage of Nancy Guthrie's disappearance with the same attention to factual accuracy and investigative detail that we have provided in this analysis. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you will not miss the next development in this ongoing investigation. Your engagement with this content also helps ensure that Nancy's case remains in public awareness, which can be crucial in missing person investigations. The data that came out of that phone on February 4th tells a story that investigators have been following for 74 days in complete silence. To understand what that extraction likely revealed and why it matters so profoundly to this investigation, we need to understand exactly what the Cellebrite Universal Forensic Extraction Device captures when it interfaces with a smartphone. Beyond the call logs and text messages that most people understand phones contain, this technology pulls cell tower connection logs showing every tower the phone communicated with and exactly when those connections occurred. It extracts records of every Wi-Fi network the phone connected to or even detected in passing, creating a map of everywhere that device traveled based on the wireless networks it encountered. It recovers photographs and deleted media, including images the user thought were permanently erased. It pulls app data from every application on the phone, including mapping apps that show searched destinations and navigation history, rideshare apps that document every trip requested, and financial transaction records from mobile payment platforms. Former FBI agent Nicole Parker, speaking to Fox News Digital about the significance of the Cellebrite device being brought to that Tucson home, made a statement that cuts through all the procedural noise. She said the device was the important part, not the badge, not the search warrant, not the evidence boxes, the device itself. That technology represents the difference between what someone says happened and what actually happened, between claimed movements and documented locations, between a verbal account and a digital record that cannot be altered after the fact. Heather Barnhart, who serves as faculty head at the Sands Institute and was the expert who analyzed Brian Koberger's phone data in the Idaho murders case, put it even more directly. She said your phone is the silent witness to your life. It knows everything you do, Every place you go, every person you communicate with, every search you conduct, every moment of every day is logged in a device most of us carry within arm's reach constantly. That phone does not forget, it does not misremember, and it does not lie. Federal investigators arrived at the residence on day 4 of Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. They stayed for nearly 3 hours. When they left, they carried evidence bags and boxes in addition to the data they had extracted digitally. But there is a detail about the timing of that February 4th visit that has received almost no analytical attention in the 74 days of public coverage that have followed. The Celebrite device arrived at that home on the exact same morning that a California man named Derek Kayla sent fake ransom messages to both Annie Guthrie and Tommaso Cian demanding Bitcoin payment. Kayla was arrested 2 days later on February 6th. His case is confirmed by Department of Justice court documents that are publicly available. He was charged with making false statements and attempting to extort money by claiming he had information about Nancy's location. The timing here is significant because it means that on the morning of February 4th, investigators made the decision to deploy the most powerful phone extraction technology in federal law enforcement to that specific address even before the ransom hoax had been resolved. Something in the evidence they had already gathered, something in the timeline or the witness statements or the initial digital records, triggered that decision. The fake ransom messages may have provided additional urgency, but the extraction would have required planning and authorization that preceded those messages. This tells us that within the first 72 hours of this investigation, federal authorities had identified a phone they believed contained evidence critical to understanding what happened to Nancy Guthrie, and whatever they found on that phone has informed every step of this investigation for the more than 10 weeks that have followed. To understand what kinds of patterns investigators would be looking for in that extracted data, we need to examine how digital forensics solved the Bryan Kohberger case, because the parallels are striking and the methodology is directly applicable. Bryan Kohberger drove to the residence at 1122 King Road in Moscow, Idaho, at approximately 4 in the morning on November 13, 2022. Before he arrived at that location, his phone went into airplane mode, cutting off all communication with cell towers. During the time the murders occurred, there was no signal from his device. After he left the area, the phone came back online, pinging cell towers along his return route. That absence, that deliberate gap in an otherwise continuous digital record, placed him at the scene at the exact time of the murders. Heather Barnhart analyzed those records for the prosecution. She explained the mechanism with precision that has direct relevance to the Nancy Guthrie case. When a phone that has been consistently communicating with cell towers suddenly goes dark in a specific location at a specific time, it creates what she calls a digital negative. The shape of the absence, the hole in the data where there should be continuous pings, tells investigators exactly where the person was trying not to leave evidence. That framework, applied to Kohberger's movement data, helped identify him as a suspect within 6 weeks of the crime. Now Barnhart has looked at the Nancy Guthrie investigation and made public statements about what she believes investigators should be examining. She told Newsweek directly that she strongly recommends and hopes that law enforcement captured tower data of all cell phones entering the area that evening and early morning, especially around 2 a.m. She pointed out that there should not be a lot of cell tower pinging around that time, which means it may be easier to isolate a list of suspects based on which devices were active in that neighborhood during the critical hours. She told Fox News Digital that the key is forming patterns across multiple visits and looking for any anomaly of someone trying to hide their digital footprint. This statement is particularly significant because of what we know about the timeline leading up to Nancy's disappearance. According to investigative reports, there were 3 separate visits to Nancy's property by the same individual in the weeks before she vanished. The first visit occurred on January 11th. The second was on January 24th. The third was on January 31st, the night Nancy disappeared. 3 separate dates, 3 separate opportunities for a phone to ping cell towers near Nancy's home, creating a pattern of presence at that location. Investigators have confirmed that they have been reviewing neighborhood camera footage from all 3 of those dates specifically. This is not random. They are building a pattern of presence, establishing who was in that area and when across multiple occasions leading up to the disappearance. Now apply Barnhart's framework to this pattern. If the same device appeared near Nancy's home on all 3 of those reconnaissance dates, pinging towers consistently, and then that same device deliberately went dark between 1:47 a.m., And 2:28 a.m. on February 1st, that pattern is the exact forensic signature that helped convict Brian Kohberger. It demonstrates familiarity with the location established through repeated visits. It shows normal digital behavior during those earlier visits. And then it shows a deliberate absence of digital footprint during the precise window when Nancy's cameras went dark and her pacemaker lost connection. That pattern, if it exists in the cell tower data, already provides investigators with a clear suspect profile. Barnhart has confirmed that the framework she used in the Kohberger case applies directly to this investigation. The question is not whether the methodology works. The question is whose device the data points to, but the phone extraction is only one component of the digital evidence in this case. The vehicle data creates an entirely separate record that, when cross-referenced with the phone data, builds an even more complete picture of what happened on January 31st. Tommaso Sion's Honda CR-V was impounded on February 2nd, day 2 of the investigation. That vehicle has been held for over 70 days now. It has been confirmed to be at a mechanic shop where it is being physically disassembled under active law enforcement supervision, with no return date offered to the owner. This level of ongoing examination, more than 10 weeks after the vehicle was initially seized, indicates that investigators are extracting every piece of data and physical evidence that car contains. Former Pima County SWAT Commander Bob Kruger confirmed to Parade magazine that modern vehicles create extraordinarily detailed records. He explained that location data, speed, and time of day can all be cross-referenced based on data recovered from the vehicle. Every modern car has an onboard computer system that logs this information continuously, creating a record that can be extracted and analyzed just like phone data. The Honda's onboard computer contains a complete GPS record of every movement that vehicle made on January 31st. It knows every turn the car took during the drive from Annie and Tommaso's home to Nancy's residence. It recorded the exact time the car arrived at Nancy's property and the exact time it departed. It logged every door opening and closing, which would show when Nancy got out of the vehicle and when the driver's door closed for the final departure. It tracked the speed at every point along the route. Most significantly, that GPS record would show whether the vehicle returned to Nancy's street after the documented 9:50 p.m. departure. If the car came back to that neighborhood at any point during the hours that followed, during the window when cameras went dark and Nancy's pacemaker lost signal, the GPS data would provide an irrefutable record of that return. That vehicle data has been in investigators' possession since day 2. It has never been publicly disclosed. The car remains in their custody, being systematically examined more than 2 months after it was initially impounded. Now consider what happens when you stack these digital records together and cross-reference them. The Celebrite extraction of the phone contains every GPS coordinate that device logged, every communication sent or received, every message that was deleted and then recovered. The Honda CR-V GPS contains a complete movement log of the last vehicle Nancy Guthrie ever rode in, including second-by-second location data and door activity. Cell tower data from January 11th, January 24th, and January 31st captures every device that was active near Nancy's home across the entire window of pre-surveillance visits. Wi-Fi router logs from neighboring properties would show any anomalous signal disruption consistent with a jamming device being active during the abduction window. Phone data plus vehicle data plus cell tower records plus router logs equals a second-by-second digital reconstruction of every person and device near Nancy's home from 9 p.m. on January 31st to 3 a.m. on February 1st. That reconstruction exists. It has been in federal investigators' hands for 74 days. In the Kohberger case, similar digital evidence led to an arrest in 6 weeks. The continued silence around what this digital record shows in Nancy's case is itself one of the most significant aspects of this entire investigation. There are only a few explanations for this prolonged period without public disclosure. One possibility is that the evidence is so conclusive that prosecutors are taking extra time to ensure every element of their case is absolutely airtight before filing charges, particularly if they believe they are dealing with someone who had some knowledge of investigative techniques. Another possibility is that the digital evidence has opened unexpected lines of inquiry that require additional investigation before the full picture becomes clear. A third possibility is that the evidence points in a direction that requires extreme care in how it is presented publicly because of the relationships and people involved. What we can say with certainty is that the technology has provided answers that investigators are acting on, even if those answers have not been shared with the public yet. Before we go further, we need to pause and remember who this investigation is actually about. Behind all of this digital analysis, all of these timestamps and cell tower pings and GPS coordinates, there is a real person whose life was interrupted and whose family is living with anguish every single day. Nancy Ellen Long Guthrie was born on January 27, 1942. She carried a pacemaker that connected to her iPhone, a piece of medical technology that helped keep her alive and that created a digital record when it stopped communicating with her phone at 2:28 in the morning on February 1st. She took her medication every day at the same time. Family members have described how she set out her pill organizer for the week on Sunday mornings, a small routine that spoke to her independence and her careful management of her own health. She attended church services by live stream from her living room, staying connected to her faith community even when she could not attend in person. She went to dinner with her daughter and her son-in-law on a Saturday evening, a completely ordinary night of family time and games and conversation. She came home in the dark, trusting the person who drove her, and walked through her own front door for what would be the last time. She did not own a smart speaker. She was not a digital person by nature. She left no digital footprint of her own on the night she disappeared. But whoever took her did leave a digital footprint. Every movement they made near her home on January 11th, on January 24th, and on January 31st was recorded by cell towers, by Wi-Fi routers, by security cameras, by GPS chips in vehicles. All of it exists in the investigative file. All of it has been there since the first week of February. The technology that Nancy herself did not use extensively has become the tool that may ultimately provide justice for what happened to her. This week, in the middle of their own agony and uncertainty, the Guthrie family donated $500,000 to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. A family that is living through the nightmare of not knowing where their mother and grandmother is reached outward to help protect other families from similar tragedies. That gesture tells you everything you need to know about who Nancy raised and the values she instilled in her daughters. Even in their darkest moment, they are thinking about others. If you have information that could help this investigation, the tip line is 1-800-CALL-FBI. There is a reward of over $1 million available, and tips can be submitted anonymously with no identification required. If you are in the medical or pharmaceutical community and encountered an unusual request for controlled substances in the weeks before February 1st, that detail could be significant and belongs with investigators. If you were in the Catalina Foothills neighborhood between January 11th and February 1st and saw anything that seemed unusual or out of place, even if it seemed minor at the time, that observation could be the piece that completes the puzzle investigators are assembling. This is day 74 of Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. The digital record of the night she vanished has been sitting in a federal evidence file since day 4. The Celebrite extraction of the phone was completed on the same morning that a fake ransom message was sent, indicating how quickly investigators moved to secure that evidence. The Honda CR-V's GPS has logged every movement that vehicle made, and that data has been in law enforcement possession since day 2. Cell tower data from 3 separate dates when visits to Nancy's property occurred, plus the night of the abduction itself, captures every device that was active near her home across the entire window investigators are examining. And somewhere in that cell tower data, between 1:47 a.m., when cameras went dark, and 2:28 a.m., when Nancy's pacemaker lost connection, in a neighborhood where almost no one else was awake at that hour, there may be an absence, a deliberate digital blackout, the shape of a device that tried not to be there, that tried not to leave the kind of continuous ping record that phones normally create. Heather Barnhart built the case that led to charges against Brian Koberger from exactly that kind of absence. She has publicly stated that the same framework applies to the Nancy Guthrie investigation. She has said that the cell tower data can isolate a list of suspects. She has said that sometimes the loudest evidence is the lack of evidence, the gap where there should be continuous data. That evidence, whether it shows presence or absence, has been in federal hands for 74 days. Not one detail of what the phone extraction revealed has been made public. Not one piece of the vehicle GPS data has been disclosed. The investigation continues in silence while a family waits for answers, and a community holds its breath, hoping for resolution. The phone knows where it was every moment of that night. The car knows where it traveled and whether it returned. The cell towers know which devices were active in that neighborhood and which devices deliberately went dark. All of this data exists, has been extracted, and is being analyzed by federal investigators with access to the same forensic frameworks that solved other high-profile cases. The Guthrie family deserves to know what happened to Nancy. They deserve to have her brought home. They deserve to see justice for whatever was done to an 84-year-old woman who should have been safe in her own home. The technology exists to provide those answers. The evidence has been collected. Now it is a matter of investigators completing their work and prosecutors making the decisions that will bring this case to resolution. The tip line remains open at 1-800-CALL-FBI. Over $1 million in reward money is available. Tips can be submitted anonymously with no identification required. If you know something, if you saw something, if you have information that could help bring Nancy home, this is the time to come forward. Your call could be the one that breaks this case open. If this analysis has helped you understand the digital forensic aspects of this investigation and you want to stay informed as new developments emerge, please subscribe to True Crime Case Study right now and click the like button on this video. We will continue to follow Nancy Guthrie's case closely and bring you updates as soon as information becomes available. Your subscription ensures you will not miss critical developments, and your engagement helps keep Nancy's case in public awareness, which can make a real difference in missing person investigations. This case is still active. Investigators are still working. The digital evidence is still being analyzed and cross-referenced. When there is a break, when charges are filed, or when Nancy is found, you will want to know immediately, not days or weeks later. Make sure you are subscribed so you receive that update the moment it happens. Type Amen in the comments for Nancy and her family. Tell us where in the world you are watching from today. Stay safe out there, and may God keep and protect you and your family every single day. Nancy Guthrie is still missing. Her family is still waiting. And somewhere in the data that has been collected, the truth of what happened to her is waiting to be revealed.